Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Root to Rise Seeds for the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Meg, and today I had the absolute pleasure of talking to Vanessa Mitera. Vanessa is the owner of Eden and Empire, which is a business that helps women entrepreneurs incorporate their faith into their businesses and build a business that feels sustainable and feels aligned with their authenticity and their faith and all those things. So I I'm obsessed. I if I had a business, I would be going to Vanessa to get coaching, and who knows, maybe at some point I will. But anyways, Vanessa was just such a love, light, amazing guest to have on the podcast, and I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I did. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome, Vanessa, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Yay! I am so thrilled to be able to talk about what we're talking about today. So, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I want to start by talking about your business. So, you're the founder of Eden and Empire. So, can you talk about what that is and what you do with your business?
Yeah, so Eden and Empire is a sub community within my larger business that I have. So, I am a brand and marketing specialist. And so, what I do is I help businesses strategize. And really, what I found is that there was this need for women to just go a little bit deeper. And I noticed this. It probably began within my own personal life, but I noticed that there was just this gap between business and faith. And I really wanted to merge the two together because I don't believe that they should be separate. I believe that they are meant to be integrated as one because, who I am in my business isn't separate in who I am with my family. And I wanted a way to make sure that my values were being instilled in every area of my life. So, what we do within Eden and Empire is we really help women, of course, with the branding and market strategy aspect of that, but also to figure out how can I run a sustainable business and grow in a way that isn't just 100% revenue driven and having to sacrifice pieces of ourselves in order to accomplish what we want. And I think a lot of times in business we have that mentality of like hustle, hustle, hustle. And where I believe that God is telling us, still honor the things that I've given you in life. Let's figure out a way to do that and still serve with an impact. So that's what we do with the community. It's just an online global community that we kind of work through together with that.
Love that. I think that's great. And I love the name Eden and Empire. Was there any inspiration behind that? Like, how did you come up with the name? Is there any story there?
It's probably not like super clever, but like I love when things are the same letter.
Mm,
And then I knew that what we were doing is building empires, like businesses that are, focused on building a legacy. And then I wanted to integrate God into it. So I typed into Chat GTP. I'm like, I want all these things. What can we do? And then it kind of came up with variations. And then I finally was like, what if we did this and this? This is perfect. So, and then I think I love when there's two letters the same because when I'm creating logos, they kind of just flow a little bit
yes.
nicer. So nothing super clever. It didn't derive from anything super personal.
Well, it has a great ring to it, so I love the
Thank
name.
you. Thank you.
So I know you mentioned that you do marketing and branding. So can you talk about your journey as it relates to that and then if you've always had faith in your life or if you came to it at a later point?
Yeah, so I've always had faith in some respects, well, in all ways, but I would say that I wasn't as much in my faith when I was younger as I am today. When I first started out, like out of high school, I planned to be a doctor. So this is totally separate from what I'm doing now. And I believe that God really showed me that, he closed a door for me that was never meant for me. I was working two jobs trying to take classes online and quickly I realized, okay, you're going to fail out of all of your classes because that's not sustainable at all. And so maybe there was a piece of that that showed me like you cannot build in a way that you are constantly burnt out to achieve the things that you want. And So, I was doing that and then I kept getting waitlisted for all of these programs. Finally, I said I can't continue, just putting my life on hold for the potential of, getting waitlisted again. And I had gotten a job in corporate and I was doing compliance investigations. So, completely separate as well. We dealt a lot with like terrorist financing, financial crimes, like all of these, behind the scenes in the online space. And I really enjoyed what I did. And I worked for an amazing company, but I felt like I was just staying where it was comfortable because of all of those things. And all the while, I had my first son. So I have two boys, and I really found a love of photography and photographing like all of those little moments. And so I stepped into the motherhood space of photography, did that for about 5 years. Then we had my second. I should backtrack. I did have a business where I was doing marketing for about 3 years, and I really liked that, but then stepped more into the photography space because that kind of took off and did that for a while until I had my second. And then God was like, you know what? I'm going to have to force you out of a space where you're comfortable because, I had one foot in on the corporate side and then I had one foot in with my business and I was working them both full time, but not really giving enough to either one of them. And the daycare that my youngest was supposed to go to, because I fully planned on going back to work after, they were like, we don't have a spot on the wait list anymore. And I was like, oh my gosh, how, like this, what am I going to do at this point? Because everything is about a year out in wait lists. And so, immediately I prayed. And it was the one thing that I said I didn't want to do was be a stay-at-home mom. But I prayed and he was like, stay home.
Mm,
And so I listened. And I, in a lot of ways, think that it was just in the simple act of the obedience
mm,
that he was just waiting to kind of hear, because within 3 months of being home with them, that same daycare that he supposedly wasn't even on the list for called me and was like, hey, we have a spot open. Would you like, him to, both my boys, to be in daycare? And I was like, sure. And my business had just really taken off. I had pivoted back into branding
mm.
and it went from like 0 to 100. And so I've been doing that ever since. I'm trying to like hit the fast forward button because I have like one other part how faith is
Yes,
integrated into
yes.
this.
Keep going, but wow, what divine timing there. That's
Yes.
wild to really such a good example of how when we ask and we listen to the answer, everything works out. So, okay, now continue about the faith part. I just was like, that is so cool.
I so agree. And so I had been running all of this and I had marketing and branding in my background, and I'm doing all of these things for my clients. And I noticed that there was this gap in a lot of them would come to me for brand photography, but I noticed that they didn't have this holistic brand. They would think that they needed photos, but in reality, they were missing so many other components of their business that were really vital to it. And so, I was doing that and then eventually I built out a course and I had built out the whole thing. I didn't have faith as forward facing in my business as I do now. And I wrote this entire course, had it ready to go, and then something just felt really off within it. And I prayed and I was like, I have this podcast where it's all about glorifying God in everything we do. And I had been doing that for months. And yet I'm not doing that in my own business.
Mm,
And so I pivoted, rewrote the entire course, and it just felt so aligned.
mm.
And then from there, it kind of birthed Eden and Empire in, just the knowledge of I stepped boldly into my faith and it felt so needed. So it just kind of went from there.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
And
thank
I
you.
kind of I want to backtrack a little bit to how you were talking about you had one foot in corporate, one foot in your business, one foot kind of in motherhood as well. So I'm curious what was keeping you in that place and not taking the leap out of corporate, was it fear? Was it financial? Was it, lack of trust in the universe or God? What was keeping you there?
So to me, clearly, I know what it was. My husband is a business owner as well. And so I held incredible benefits. And so for me, it was stepping out, and it is a lack of faith as well,
Mm,
because just knowing that you're going to be provided for and that everything's going to be taken care of. I didn't have that strong sense of, okay, if I step out into this, what does that even look like? And I think there was a lot of self-doubt in myself because when I was in that photography space, I was not making a lot of money, and especially in the motherhood space. And so I think there was a fear of, can we actually afford for me to go out on my own? Can, we afford now being both self-employed, the, insurance aspect of it, because it's like your insurance when you're self-employed is not the greatest.
Mm-hmm.
And then just, of course, again, that lack of fear. So it was really everything that you said. And the craziest part is, when you do step out, first of all, I think when you step out into business from corporate and you do it fully, you give it a different level of your attention. And I think that that's another piece of it that I felt like, okay, now I can fully focus on this. What does this look like?
Mm-hmm. That's great, and I know it's really scary to do that, so I commend you, especially having kids and, not having the benefits. I'm sure that's really scary.
Yes.
But then you see how everything kind of works out for you, and you're held. And so sometimes it's taking that leap. And sometimes you do get smacked in the face and you suck it up and you go back to corporate, and that's okay too. But it's really just about developing that trust in God and just having the faith that things are going to work out how they're supposed to. So I
Yes.
love that. Great story, great, path. And I want to dive a little deeper into the marketing aspect of business and of your business, because marketing can be really authentic and it can come from a really, great place. And it can also be used as a tool to manipulate and get people to buy things. And I fall victim to a very good marketing all the time.
I'm
So,
here.
and marketing is necessary for business, to be profitable. So, how do you reconcile this, you know, kind of dualistic dichotomy? I don't know what the word is, but how do you
Yeah.
reconcile the two?
I feel like that's always front of mind for me. So for a while I did network marketing and everything felt to me so inauthentic and it drove me away, and it almost, because I was really successful with it, but what ended up happening is it felt so disingenuous that it made me step back from social media, from marketing. And so when I stepped back into this space, I was like, that's the number one thing I don't want to do. I don't want to cold message everything that I do. And it almost put this like paralyzing fear in me to where it stopped me from really, going out and promoting what I had. And so the way that I've learned to view it is that with business, I think that you are called to be a business owner because it's so hard. There's so many different things. Like when you talk about, going back to corporate, it's always front of mind because like that'd be just so much easier. And like, there's so many different levels to that. But obviously, this is so much better. But still, I mean, you always have that doubt in your mind or imposter syndrome. And the thing that I always think about when it comes to business is like, of course, I believe that we were called to it, but at the same time, when we're hiding those gifts that we're given, it's not helping anyone. It's not helping the people that we were called to serve in so many different ways. Like when I go out and buy a product, or I work with a coach, or I have a service with someone, it's not just helping them, it's helping me. And if they wouldn't have promoted what they had to offer, I would have never known about it. And so I think there's a way where if your mindset is serving first and really making an impact and helping people, naturally that comes through. And you're always coming from a place that's not numbers driven. It's more about how can I actually serve? And then I think when it comes to like the marketing aspect of it, just remaining who you are, I think it sounds so like, like a buzzword or like I don't want to say triggered. What is the
Cliche.
word? Yes, yes, cliche. Because you hear it so often, but I think there's a reason you hear it so often because it's very true. Like remaining. So when I work with women in Eden and Empire, the number one thing that we start with is building that foundation of knowing who you are, then identifying who your audience is so you can serve them in the best way. So I think that like there are absolutely people that are just driven towards the numbers and, it's a numbers game to them. I think when you approach it with a different mindset, like a kingdom mindset or a values mindset, it really shifts everything.
Yeah, I love that, and it probably feels more sustainable too if you're tapping into what feels natural to you. So how do you with the women that you work with and even with your own experience, how did you tap into, okay, what are my natural gifts and how can I use these to serve others? And have you allowed yourself or have you noticed a shift at all in those gifts as you've kind of gone through your business?
Yeah, so I think with business, at least the thing that I've noticed either with myself or even just the women that I work with is that it's always changing. Like you're constantly evolving as you're learning and growing for one, and then you go through different seasons in your life. And so I'm a person that is not huge on the word balance because I feel like as you go through those seasons, it's going to require more of you in different areas of your life. So for me right now, actually the newer thing is that I'm focusing more on myself and healing parts of myself that I didn't even know needed healing. And that in turn makes me a better leader. And I feel like with the women that I work with, there's a lot of times where they don't realize that there's like these hidden things that are behind the scenes that they needed healing with. And I feel like I noticed that within myself just over time. Like it was something that was constantly growing and evolving. And I feel like I might need you to ask me the question again because I feel like I'm gonna start to stray.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm, like, so absorbed in what you're saying. I think it was, okay, how did you uncover your own
Okay.
natural gifts? How do you
Okay.
help people? And the evolving part, you were just speaking to that, so okay,
Thank you. I do
you
that
got
all the
it.
time. Yes.
Go
Sometimes
on
I'm
as
like,
many tangents as you want, I'm here for it, I love it.
I feel like I'm always constantly uncovering pieces of myself. And in this season that I'm in, I had a lot of rejection wounds, and I did this series on my podcast that, I went really deep and really vulnerable about it because I felt like most people don't talk about those things in business. And I think oftentimes it's so needed because we feel like we are supposed to portray this image on social media. And so people are silently struggling with things that they didn't even know they were struggling with, or somebody to just even put a name to that piece of it, or just to know that they're not alone. But I think for myself, it's in becoming a mom. I always uncover pieces. Being within business, just it takes a lot. It works a lot with your mental. I think that there's so many moments of not having clarity that I just really surrender and say, I don't know everything. Lord, please fill me with what you need me to know or what I need to change. And sometimes it's also my clients, like, they show me areas that it's like, okay, I could serve you better, or maybe we don't need this and that. So I think it's just always evolving. I would say maybe like the most specific way to answer your question is just I don't know that I've fully uncovered that piece of it because it's just constantly happening. But more recently, I would say is when I had the most clarity.
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious too, I know you mentioned like leaning on God and praying when you don't have the answers. And I've definitely tried that. And sometimes I feel like my mind comes up with an answer. So how do
Yes.
you differentiate, okay, this is God speaking to me or working through me versus this is just like my unconscious patterns running the show, like this is what I want to hear.
I always do that. I always do that. And so, more recently for myself, what I realized is that I have like these deep rejection wounds because my biological father, I never knew him. And there's so much that I unpacked even within the last few years because he was killed. And so
Mm.
I never got to meet him. And it made that rejection very permanent. And I didn't realize how much it was manifesting in different areas of my life. But one of the ways that it was is just seeking validation from other people constantly and people pleasing and just doing all of these things. And so it translated into I'm not worthy. And so every time I would hear like, things in my mind, I would be like, is this me or is this God? And I had what I was doing in my business is to glorify him. And so in my mind, I was like, this is the ultimate father, right? And I don't want to let him down. So am I actually hearing you clearly, or is it you telling me these things? And I think the thing about it is it's not bad to question. It's not bad to question what you're hearing and what you're experiencing because you're maintaining that relationship with him. And I think for myself, the way that I can validate it is through other people. People will come to me and they'll say something that, oh my gosh, that's confirmation of everything that I've been thinking, or I'll read scripture. That's the number one thing is knowing what the word says so that you can really validate it against the things that you're hearing. Is this of God? Like, would God tell me that I'm a horrible person because I didn't sign on multiple clients, or I didn't do the dishes today? No, that's not the God that I know. So being really grounded in scripture, like I've been in my faith as long as I can remember, but I'm not perfect. There's moments where I feel like God is silent. And that's what I had been experiencing within the past few months is I was like, are you mad at me? Did I do something like I didn't glorify you enough, or, I didn't build this part of my business in the right way? So then am I like Moses and I did one wrong thing and then, the promised land was taken away, quote unquote. But then it's when you base it on scripture, that's not accurate. Like that's not
Yeah.
how God is.
Yeah.
So that's how he shows up a lot for me is I see things recurring again and again and then base it on scripture and all that. So, what about for you? Do you have anything that pops up for you?
Well, like you, I do have moments where I feel like God is silent. And I think that my lesson in this season of life is to be okay with not having the answers. I've had a few people in my life kind of reiterate that to me. And I've had some experiences where I've had a question in just a random question, like, how do I know this person? And not being able to figure it out. And then years later, I see them and I'm like, this is how I knew, that literally just happened to me last week. And I'm like, oh my God. And it was just funny. I was like, okay, this is what I'm being taught is just you don't need to know, the answers will come
Mm-mm.
whenever they're ready to. And I kind of want to comment on what you said a little bit ago about how you were sharing on your podcast about your wounds, your rejection wound, and thank you for sharing that because that wound is a tricky one. I feel like it is kind of kept a little closer to the about like nobody wants to talk about it, but it's very real. And my partner and my aunt and uncle are marriage counselors like through the church. So we've been doing some work with them and they've shared things about their relationship that are also happening in our relationship. And it's so healing to just be like, okay, we're all human and there's only so many human issues that we can have. So like more likely than not, we all have a little bit of everything. And so I love that. I think there's so much power in sharing. But when I do have those God moments, it shows up a lot with like synchronicities in my life or just like a very, very powerful knowing where it's like like I know it and everything's silent. And so I'm like, this is God.
Yes.
Sometimes it's hard because we want to like search. I want to search for that feeling and I can't have it all the time. So yeah,
I think
hopefully.
in my mind too, I'm always so for me, like he moved so quickly and this portion of my business, like the other leg of my business, that when it didn't happen as quickly as I thought that it would with Eden and Empire, that's where I felt like, what did I do wrong? And it felt like he was silent, but all along he was always right there.
Mm,
I've heard this quote, and you may have heard it too, but it's like when somebody is right next to you, they don't shout, like they just
mm-hmm,
whisper.
mm-hmm,
And I was being so like I was in my mind so much that I couldn't even hear when he was talking to me.
mm-hmm,
And it's just, I've also learned that there is such beauty in the silence too, because it doesn't always, I'm always expecting it to be like so bold.
mm-hmm,
Like God
mm-hmm,
is going to come through and somebody's going to come to my door and tell me, just like these big, bold gestures. And he's like, that's not what he knows what I need.
mm-hmm.
And, he always works it out for good, but it doesn't always feel like that in the moment. It sometimes can feel very lonely. So I can relate to that piece of it.
Yep, definitely. I know you mentioned too that you use scripture and you've mentioned prayer too. Is there anything else that you use, either like faith related or not, to kind of stay more grounded so that you can hear those little whispers when they're coming through?
Yeah, so a lot of times I think maybe, and this is why I started Eden and Empire, is the community, because I feel like not necessarily my community, but just a community of people who are of faith, So I have my mom, so I always go to her, my husband or my aunt will I'll go to her, or like friends that I know that I'll say, am I being crazy? Like, is this actually, something that even makes any sense? And for me, I think that everything in the world is it's so conflicting. Like, you have so many things that the world is telling you, go faster, go, go find yourself, go this, go that. You could be anything you want to be, like all of these different things. And they all sound really great, but they're not necessarily what God has in store. And I think too, it can be really, especially in business, you see all these people that go so fast, they grow so quickly, and they're making all this crazy money. And the reality is that's not the norm. That's very rare for people to be at that level that quickly. And so I think that all these thoughts start filling my mind, and having people who are, grounded in scripture can just bring me back to, you know, whatever it says is really helpful. And then YouTube, or sometimes I'll just ask chat. I'm like, hey, Claude, will you pretend you're a pastor? Like, if you base it on scripture, what do you think this potentially could be? So, I mean, obviously, I don't base everything on that, but sometimes it's like, I just kind of want another opinion right now.
Yeah. Yep, something objective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. And I love leaning on scripture because the Bible has so many good verses. I mean, the book is so old and it's been around forever. So obviously there's wisdom in it.
Yes.
And kind of going off what you said about how some people are going so fast and they're making all this money and their business objectively looks successful.
Right.
And I think, people who have faith or who feel spiritually connected to something, I think there's a lot of unraveling to do about wealth and abundance and how we can authentically create that. And I think I'm struggling with it myself too. I still work in corporate, but having this idea of like, oh, if I leave corporate, I have to, start a business and make all this money. And I've recently kind of been wondering, well, is that true? Or do I just need to make enough money to live the life that feels authentic to me? How do we reconcile this? Because obviously everybody wants a lot of money. That would be nice if we could all be rich, and I do think someday we all will be. But how do we incorporate our faith in this idea of more material wealth?
Yeah. So the number one person that I look at is when you look at Jesus, like he, I don't think you're called to, be living well. Honestly, there's two different perspectives. A lot of people of faith believe you either have the abundance mindset or you have the poverty mindset. And so for me, I have the abundance mindset because I believe I'm the daughter of the Most High. So like I want to treat my children with the best. And so I believe that he has that in mind for us as well. But I think there is a level of, what are you wanting the money for? What does that bring you? If you're wanting it, I think that's what drives everything, is people think that money is going to mean XYZ. But the thing that I found is the more that I make, it just checks, it's another like goal that I've checked off, and I'm on to the next one. It doesn't really have full meaning because it's just a dollar amount that sits in the account. When it comes to corporate, the thing that I will say is I'm in two mindsets. So I'm in the mindset of, yes, I believe that when you fully step into your business, you can give it a different level of attention, and there's that level of risk that is so different than when you're, in corporate and you have that to fall back on. But at the same time, I'm a huge advocate of making sure that you have a sustainable business so that it doesn't have to be, making crazy money, but it takes the stress off of you and your business if you know that you can build and you can reinvest back into it to grow it. I think a lot of times people step into business because they think, okay, I need to just go all in. And then they don't realize, okay, well, there's a level of things that you have to reinvest in: a website, if you're a product based business, you have to reinvest back into that. And then they get so like all of their day is concerned about, okay, I got to make money, I got to make money, and you end up just, I think, burnt out because really it does take a little bit. And we have that mentality of, okay, grow. And as if you work harder, then this will happen and this will happen. And it just doesn't, I don't really think, and all the women that I've worked with and just my own experience, you can run a successful business and it will happen, but there's so many other factors that come into play. These people that have crazy successful businesses that we perceive online, you don't see all the years prior to that were spent on XYZ, and now they have teams, and it's just not that black and white. So my suggestion, and coming from this place where I did leave corporate and go into my own business, it was so nice to step into a business that like I felt a little bit of security in, but then at the same time, you can't wait forever. Like you can't
Mhm.
just be like, okay, I would set a goal and say, what is the minimum that I need to just, pay my bills? It doesn't have to be extravagant. And it's okay if I take a hit for a little bit, but as long as I'm able to pay my bills, then we're good. So that's usually what I kind of go off of.
Love that. I think that's great. And I think sometimes it's so tricky because like you, I tend to look for validation externally. So is it okay if I do this? Can I, take this step? Can I take the hit? And at the end of the day, the only person that needs to approve of you making that decision is you. And so, yeah, just very inspiring. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's hard to stay committed to one faith, and also when you have your own business, I imagine it's also probably hard to stay committed to that. So, and you're a mom too, and you have a husband, so you're doing a lot of things. So how do you stay committed to what you're doing and also stay committed to making that time for yourself so that you can hold space for everybody else?
Yeah, so I think that it goes back to just knowing that people are like, how do I say this? It goes back to not having that mindset of everything's going to be in balance because it's not. In the season that I'm in, I'm a priority and my son is a priority. Like he's home for the summer now, and I made the decision to keep him home rather than having him in homeschool or whatnot. And that's the beauty of my business is that I do have that ability to, still work and take off time with him and whatnot. But I just recognize that everything's not going to be, this perfect harmony. But I feel like when I'm in moments, so like now, you have 100% of my attention. So my business has 100% of my attention. And when I'm with my son, he has 100% of my attention. And same thing with my youngest and my husband, or when I'm with family, I'm with them and I'm present. And then there's times where I deserve that, right? Like I deserve to have my own business and to have something that is special for me. And so there are times where my boys don't get 100% of me. My business gets my focus in that time, and I've just learned to try to not feel guilty about it. And I just know that like with my faith, I have every intention every morning of waking up and reading the Bible, but I have a 2-year-old, and so he likes to wake up at 5 in the morning. And, I don't have the ability to just wake up earlier because waking up at 4 in the morning just is not a piece of like what I want to do. So I just, when it comes to my faith, like God is always a piece of, my decisions. And is it perfect? No, but I give myself grace and knowing that like it's there, and my business is something that it always has my attention, but there are seasons where sometimes I need to focus on me and making sure that I'm okay in order to run my business successfully. So I would say that that's just the way that I do it is when I'm in it, I give it 100% and just give myself grace that it's not going to be, perfect all the time.
That's great. And I heard something on a podcast, I don't know, a few years ago that was talking about the myth of balance and how balance is just this impossible achievement and people just use it to beat themselves up. But I love that you said whatever you're doing, you're present with it because the only moment we have is the present moment. So, if you can try to give it your all, that's really what matters.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
love that.
sometimes it's really boring when I'm just sitting on the couch with my boys. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I might be doing other things,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
for the
maybe
most part, yeah.
scrolling or, getting some things off the to-do list for sure.
Exactly. Exactly.
What I guess we'll maybe just have a couple other questions here. I know you mentioned that you you experience or you're trying to work through some of the guilt that you may experience. So how do you kind of approach working through that? Because I know it can be tricky.
I think the hardest part of being a mom that I never realized is the amount of guilt that you have surrounding just everything, and I can appreciate the fact that, like, I have an identity outside of being a mom, so that means that it's okay for me to have a babysitter or to, take a little bit longer at the grocery store, all of these silly little things that, I'm hard on myself for. I don't think it goes away because no matter how hard I try, there's still a level of that. And I think as my boys get older, I don't want this to sound bad, but, like, me as a mom, like, I think I'm really going to love as they're older because these
Mm.
younger stages are kind of hard at times, and so also recognize, like, I feel guilt around that, it just comes in all areas, and just knowing that, like, I showed up, I did the very best that I could today, and are they taken care of? Do I love them? Yes, but sometimes that means I don't spend all my time with them or they don't get all my attention, and it's okay if I go and do other things.
I really hope our society can normalize that more. Hopefully, the guilt might start to subside, but
Yes.
I definitely relate to that. Not that I don't have kids, but I do have a dog, and it's not the same by any means, but it's
Oh,
the
in
first
some ways it is.
it was the first puppy I ever got, and the first, like, 9 months, I was like, "My god, what did I do? I never wanna have kids. It's probably like 20 times worse than this." So, I can relate to that, like, getting through the younger years and then being like, "Okay, you're independent, a little more independent. Go
No,
be
I feel like
free."
it's very similar. We had our first dog and she was our baby, our everything. And I realized, even now with having two, like we had two dogs at one point and they fought and we were always like yelling at them and having them quiet down. And I'm like, we do the exact same thing now with our boys. And like, you feel guilty for leaving them or, you have to find a sitter. Like, you
Mhm.
wake up with them at night. So in a lot of ways, it is very similar.
Yes. The only thing with the dog is, like, they never grow up and leave the nest,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
they also don't talk back, so love that. Okay, just one final question here. For anyone who's maybe looking to start a business, who's unsure what to do, or they're not sure how to incorporate their faith into, what they want for their business, what advice would you give for them?
Yeah. So, first off, I feel like if you have the desire, that's to me where it starts off. I think God places that desire or whatever your faith is, right? It might not be God, it might be a different belief, but I feel like you feel called to start a business, right? And I think that you have to kind of listen to that piece of it because not everybody is called to do that. It's very difficult. And going into it knowing that it's not going to be perfect, but there's so many perks that come with being a business owner that make it so worth it. When it comes to your faith, I think you just have to listen to what makes the most sense for you. For so many years, faith was a subtle guide for me in my business, and it wasn't forward facing. I never hid it, but it wasn't, what it is now. The women that I work with, not everybody has, faith as a piece of the forefront of their business. They're not as bold within it, and that's totally okay. I think that as long as you are incorporating what your faith looks like, that can be your values and the way that you serve your clients, the special gifts and talents that you bring to the table, those are gifts. And that's something unique that you possess. And so I think as long as you're honoring those things and sharing it with the world, it doesn't have to be bold and crazy, out there for you to incorporate your faith into it. I think just going and and the way that I do it is God is my business partner, right? Like he helps me with my decisions. I read scripture and I base it off of that. He gave me, such guidance through the Bible. And I think that that's what I look to. And then I try to treat my clients with that same respect and serve them in the best way that I can. So that would be my suggestion. And then just do it scared, even if it doesn't feel like you have all the cards out on the table or like not everything's aligned. It won't be. It will always ebb and flow with business.
Well, that's great. Thank you. I
Yeah.
love that. Okay, this is so great. And I'm sure a lot of people will be resonating with this conversation. So, for people that are interested and want to work with you or just see more about you, where's the best place for them to connect?
Yeah, so on social, pretty much everywhere, it's at Mitera Branding. And then like on TikTok or LinkedIn or Facebook, it's just my first and last name, Vanessa Mitera. Eden and Empire goes through cohorts. And so, the doors aren't always open, but on the Eden and Empire site, we are always, putting updates and whatnot through there.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was so fun. I loved your energy and it was so calming. So thank you.
Got you. Thank you. Thanks again so much for listening to this episode today. Hopefully, this episode gave you some inspiration. And one thing that I really loved and will take away is that not all of the pieces need to be aligned. Not everything needs to be perfect before taking a next step and taking an action. So, if you're feeling called to take an action and you're worried about not every single piece being into place, like Vanessa said, not everything will always be in place. And sometimes it's just about having that faith, taking that leap, whatever that action is. So, thanks again for listening. I will link everything for Vanessa in the show notes, and I hope you enjoyed. Much love to you all.